We've got two people to speak to about this. Murat Aslan is a security analyst. He is live in Ankara, also here in the United Kingdom. Samuel Ramani, a Russian foreign policy researcher at the University of Oxford. Samuel, we'll come to you in just a moment. Murat, if I could start with you, tell us how delicate this situation is now, especially as it does seem to appear, doesn't it? We've been talking about this possibility of a full-on assault on Idlib for more than a year now. That assault had been held back by agreements between Ankara and Moscow. But it seems as if Damascus doesn't care about those anymore.
As you said, yeah, it's clear. Because for the last 1 year, there are two different processes ongoing. The first one is diplomatic channels, and everything was very normal. As you know, Turkey, Russia, and Iran established a constitutional committee, and they started to discuss on what will happen in Syria. On the other hand, there are incidents on the ground, fights on the ground, and a humanitarian disaster. Because mainly in Idlib, there is a strategy of Russia and Iran-backed Assad regime to evacuate the whole region and start a kind of demographic cleansing. And as you know, there is an indiscriminate shelling. That means there are two different war crimes. And Turkey will have the burden afterwards. So Turkey must first stop the Assad regime's attacks, and later then must normalize. Otherwise, Turkey will meet a huge influx of refugees and have concerns with the border security.
Now, what sort of position do you expect Turkey to adopt if, as Recep Tayyip Erdogan says, it's only a matter of time before a military operation begins to stop this assault on civilians? Would it be an aggressive position from the Turkish forces or a defensive one?
For the last 1.5 months, Turkey has pushed more than 2 brigades into Idlib, and they are ready to react, against Assad regime. So if diplomacy fails, what I believe is that Turkey will be more active on the ground, responding Assad regime, and obtain the required borderline that was indicated in Sochi. So Turkey must be expected more aggressive if diplomacy fails.
Murat, thank you so much indeed. Murat Aslan speaking to us from Ankara. Let's speak to Samuel Ramani. Just to remind you, he's a Russian foreign policy researcher at Oxford University. Samuel, do you think Moscow has lost control of Bashar al-Assad?
I think that Russia certainly saw an opportunity to violate the Sochi agreement by launching a full-on assault on Idlib, because Assad was in the ascendancy all across the Syrian conflict. He had secured a sphere of influence in northern Syria. He is making substantial progress towards capturing West Aleppo, which he eventually achieved. And the initial stages of the offensive that we've seen since December were very quick and successful. They landed the highways in the M4 and M5. They took over the rebel stronghold of Manat al-Shuman. But what the Russians didn't expect, and where they lost control, was when Assad's forces went from encircling to actually targeting Turkish observation posts and killing Turkish military personnel. They didn't expect Assad to do that, and they also didn't expect Turkey, given its commitments in northern Syria and in Libya, to threaten to retaliate so strongly and upend the entire situation and the offensive.
I mean, it's pretty clear in terms of the military power that no group outside of any national army can compete with Moscow's military might. And diplomatically, we've just had an example at the UN Security Council with a permanent seat on that Security Council. Russia can veto any potential resolution that it disagrees with. But what about this justification that Moscow keeps giving for its continuing bombing of civilians? We've had bakeries, basic civilian infrastructure, dozens and dozens of medical facilities being targeted. And every time the finger is pointed at Moscow, it says, we were just shooting terrorists.
Yes, that's the discourse that Russia has assumed since the early stages of the conflict. Basically, that anyone who's opposed to the Assad regime are effectively trying to upset domestic state order. They're trying to overhaul the rule of law, and hence they can be considered to be terrorists rather than freedom fighters or revolutionaries. And that does extend towards civilian targets, because the Russian disinformation and the Russian media narratives show that hospitals and bakeries and things like this are actually being used as arms caches to supply towards ISIS or al-Nusra or other groups. And that's something that they keep repeating. So they argue that, one, civilian targets are actually military targets in disguise, and second, that all revolutionaries are simply violating international law because the UN recognizes the Damascus regime, the Assad regime, as the only legitimate authority in Syria.
Samuel, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Samuel Ramani from Oxford University.